Greetings. My name is Dave Thurman. For those who don't know me, I am an old missionary kid, grew up in Rhodesia, that's now Zimbabwe. Been privileged for the last 20 or so years to serve on the board of Hippo Valley Christian Mission and been the chairman the last decade or so. I've also been blessed to go overseas a lot. I've been to over 40 countries. I think about 40 mission trips. I think 30 or so that I led, and some others that I was able to go and participate in. And I mention all of that because this is a mission story video. My good friend Sarah Kowalski asked if I would do this. I think it's for a small group that she and Clay lead in their home. It may be something that others enjoy as well, but I hope that it will shed some light on the greatness of God and how He shows up in unusual times and in very powerful ways. I think when Sarah asked, she probably thought I would talk about Africa since I grew up there, since I've made 20 trips or so to Zimbabwe over the last 20 plus years. But actually, the story that I want to tell, true story, is about a team that I was privileged to lead to India. Uh, I think the year was 2009, January of 2009. It was the fifth straight year that I would go to Northeast India, to Nagaland, and to Manipur. Very interesting area of the world. I'll tell you more about it in a minute. I also had been in other parts of India. I think my first time to go was 2002 with Mike Pemberton, a missionary that the Church of Mount Gilead supports, a friend of mine, and he also is the one that I first went to Nagaland with in 2005. And then I would go, I think, 5 straight years as God opened up some doors. But let's talk about the team a little bit. The first way that God showed up was the fact that one of the team members was to be Janet Hudson. Janet, a dear soul who went to be with the Lord a year and a half or so ago. And she had gone with me twice to Northeast India. She had also accompanied Mike and worked with other missionaries, just a beautiful lady. And her daughter, Brenda Faulkner, is a chiropractor. And a little before we were to leave, she said, "Mom, I don't know why, but there's something that just doesn't feel right about this. You don't look healthy. I can't put my finger on it, but I think you need to terminate that trip." And so Janet did, and I was sad about that. The other six of us left. We went from Indianapolis to Chicago. Then we flew from O'Hare Airport in Chicago to Amsterdam, Schiphol Airport there in the Netherlands. And from there, we then caught a flight to Delhi. And I think it was during that flight to Delhi, it may have been the next day, but there was a point there early in our travels when Janet had a massive stroke, wound up in the hospital, and there were some lasting repercussions. But certainly, if she had been on the plane with us or in one of those airports or even up on the mountain that where we wound up, I know that she would have died. And so we're so grateful because the Lord gave her another 9 years or so, and so valuable to the church and to her friends, and especially, I think, to her children and grandchildren. Anyway, I mentioned that flight from Chicago to Amsterdam. We got away late, and as I was looking, I could see that we weren't going to make our plane in Amsterdam. That was going to be a problem. But when we landed, we were very fortunate. God showed up here as well, in the sense that they had held the plane. They don't usually do that, but I think there were 12 or 13 of us on that flight. Our team of six, along actually it was a team of seven. Janet would have been the eighth, but our team of seven, part of that group. And so literally, we got off of that lengthy flight in Amsterdam, ran just slightly down a hall in the same terminal, and jumped on a plane that had waited for us. And so it was tiring because we had two long flights in a row, but we were very blessed. We landed in Delhi, and there my friend DK Angami met us. It was late at night, and he drove us to what they call the Naga House in Delhi, a place where folks from Nagaland can stay and where they can do business, have meetings. And so we were kind of in a living room area, a large room, where they had some food and snacks for us. And we had about a 4 or 5 hour layover there. And so I don't think I got any sleep, but I rested a little bit. And then the next morning we got on a plane to Calcutta. That's always an adventure landing there because it's a huge city that has awful problems with pollution. And so it was very smoggy, and we circled for over an hour. Finally, we landed. But when we did land there, uh, I realized as people were picking up their luggage that my luggage had not come. That had happened once before to me, and I was able to go shopping in a mall in Calcutta, but this time we didn't have very long. And so I had my carry on, but I was going to be preaching and teaching, and I knew that I needed my suit and ties and some other nice clothes. And so it was a little bit of a problem. And so that was an issue where in the airport at Calcutta, we were talking about what we would do and just decided when I got to Nagaland, if they had clothes my size, I'd buy them. And so then we flew up to a place called Dimapur, which is the largest city in Nagaland, kind of in a flat area. And then from there, we got on into vehicles and you head up the mountain. And I mean, it's extremely steep. It's not more than a 50, 60-mile trip up to Kohima, but it takes a couple of hours as you really go up in the mountains. When we got to Kohima, many of the team were staying with a good friend of mine, Professor Tuba, wonderful Christian man. But I was staying with a fellow named Joe, with a medical doctor who I had not ever met before, but a wonderful Christian man. He actually is an OBGYN, and his wife is a primary care physician. So both doctors, and we had great accommodations there, just had a blast. And the reason we were there, I had made a lot of inroads in Nagaland through a friend, Sibu Rutsa, and I had actually been able to meet with the governor, had been able to then meet with lots of preachers, do a great deal of teaching. Um, and this doctor had asked if we might go out to his home church, a place called Chichima. Again, about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive through the mountains in Nagaland. Very large church, and they were celebrating their centennial. And so Scott Saltzman, another preacher, and I had been asked to come and to be speakers at these revival type services where there would be many, many people. And it was a real blessing. And as I said, staying with the doctor was great, and I was able to renew some friendships with people in Nagaland. And the reason that that is such an important place, the American Baptist Church sent missionaries there a century ago or so when the people were still headhunters. There are many, many tribes, 20, 30 different Naga tribes. And eventually, most of the people became Christian. And it's this little island of Christianity surrounded by darkness because off to one side is Bangladesh, which of course is Muslim, mainland India, the big part of the nation, which is mostly Hindu, but has many other religions. To the north, you have Nepal and Bhutan, which are mostly Buddhist. And then, of course, Myanmar on the other side, but also a connection with China. And of course, China, with so many world religions, but still greatly in need of Christ, though thankfully the church there is growing. And so, with all of these Christians in Nagaland, many of them that go to Bible college, strong churches, there's really a need for them to be motivated to go out as missionaries. And even without a passport, they can go into China. They can go into most of Southeast Asia. They can go into the main part of India that is very has a very small percentage of Christianity. And so I, along with some others, at the encouragement of Dr. Rutsa, had been going to Bible colleges, going to churches, and no matter what their background, what their denomination or tribe might be, always they were welcoming to myself and to Scott, and allowed us to teach and preach good New Testament Christianity. Now, God obviously had showed up, as I had mentioned, in a couple of ways. It also just so happened that though most Naga people are not large, the doctor was almost identical size to me, maybe just an inch shorter. And so I was able to wear some of his clothes. And believe it or not, My suitcase had never left Chicago for some reason. It was some kind of a glitch. They did eventually send it, flew it to Kolkata, flew it then to Dimapur, and some poor guy managed to come up the mountain and find us. And so, about my third day there, I got my luggage, and that was a real blessing. But as we were going to leave Nagaland to then go spend a week in northern India in Chandigarh, um, one of our team members, a lady who I really hadn't known very well before this trip, lost her passport. She couldn't find it. And we prayed fervently. We searched the house where she was staying. We searched the doctor's house. We tried to backtrack everywhere we could go. And it looked like it was just lost, which is a major problem when you're in a country like India. And we were going to have to go to an embassy. We were going to have to go through some difficult procedures. It might change our trip somewhat. But somebody remembered at the last minute that she had ridden in a taxi at one point. She and a couple of others, and someone remembered the name of the taxi. We phoned. We were able to give a description of the driver. They figured that part out. He went out to his car. He searched, and where the two seats kind of come together in the front, the passport had slipped down, and the driver found it and saved us an incredible amount of trouble. So, wonderful stay in Nagaland. Uh, Good things accomplished there. But here's where the trip really gets exciting. We were going to Chandigarh, and I'd never been to that part of India. It's 4 or 5 hours north, I think 5 hour drive north of Delhi. And so you're getting way up, climbing up towards the mountains. And northern India is very different. We flew, well, actually, first we drove from Kohima down to Dimapur. And as I said, that is very mountainous. There are a lot of landslides in that area. Um, Anytime you make that trip, it's a little bit harrowing. The fellow professor Chuba, who I mentioned, who had once been a part of the government and had been a professor in a college there, had a professional driver of his own. And so I was part of our team that was in the car with his driver, who really should have been in the Indianapolis 500 or down at Talladega. This fella could fly down that mountain twice as fast as anyone else, which isn't necessarily good because you're seeing the jungle fly by as you drop, and you realize many times as you go around turns that if he just made the slightest mistake or miscalculation, we would be falling hundreds of feet to our death. Scott Saltzman swears there were times we were only on two tires. I don't know if that's true or not, but we made it down to Dimapur. We then caught our flight and went to Kolkata. And by the time we got there, it was late afternoon, early evening. And we knew we had to catch a flight to Delhi. Should have been no problem. We flew into the domestic part of the airport since we were going from Nagaland, which is technically part of India, into Kolkata, a huge city in India. But there was some issue, some suspicion. I don't know what it was, but they decided we needed further security. And the only way to do that was to go to the international part of the airport, a different building about 300 yards away. There were maybe 26 or so of us that were going to be boarding that flight. Some others were already going to have been on it as it came from somewhere else, I believe. But it was a real hassle as to how we were going to get this all pulled off. The fellow in charge at the domestic airport kept talking about things we needed to do, and I realized that if we didn't rush, we were going to miss our flight. And so I finally just jumped in and said, "Can I be the point person and help our group get this process taken care of and get on that plane because we got somebody waiting for us in Delhi?" And so this fella handed me 26 passports, not just our team of seven, but all these other folks too. I think I put them in a bag and I said to everybody, "Follow me. I've been to the airport in Calcutta a lot. You know, get your luggage and we'll wheel it up to the international airport." We did. We went through all this heightened security, got on our plane in time to make the trip to Delhi. We were going to get there late at night around 10:30. I felt so good because we had pulled all this off. But as I sat back, something dawned on me. Delhi has a domestic airport and an international airport that are separated by 3 or 4 miles. And since we had boarded at the international terminal with the heightened security, it dawned on me we were going to land at the international airport, Indira Gandhi International Airport in Delhi, but DK was waiting to pick us up at the domestic airport. So I knew this was going to be a problem. Well, we landed, we got our luggage. Scott had the number for DK, his cell phone, and we were able to make a phone call and to tell him we're at the international airport. Now, traffic in Delhi is terrible. 3, 4 miles doesn't sound like much, but fighting traffic took him a good half an hour to come. Then he showed up and he was in an SUV. Well, it was him, one other fellow from his church, and an SUV, and there were 7 Americans and all of our luggage, and there was no way this was going to work. And I said, TK, we got to have another vehicle. So he said, no problem. He walked over. There's always thousands of taxi drivers at any major airport in India. They usually drive those old ambassador style cars that haven't changed since the 50s. They're ancient, never in good shape, almost never. And sure enough, here comes a fella, an Indian, in his car. So 4 of the team went with DK. 2 people, Joe and Christina, went with me. They sat in the back. I sat in the front. And as I tried to talk with the driver, I realized that though he spoke Hindi and maybe another language or two, he only knew a few words in English. But we were following DK. It was going to be a 5 hour trip. We weren't going to get to Chandigarh till about 5 a.m. But hey, it was going to be okay. So we probably followed for about 20 minutes, got to a big roundabout. And as people were going around this huge roundabout, hundreds of cars, I saw DK head off in one direction, but we circled back around. And I tried to ask the driver why, and he just said airport. And I said, no, no, we were just at the airport. We want to go to Chandigarh. But he went back to the airport anyway. He ran inside for 10 minutes, comes back, said that he had to fill out some paperwork he had forgotten. And I now said, do you know where we're going? And he said, Chandigarh. Well, great. Chandigarh is a city of a couple of million people. It's not huge by Indian standards, but it's a big city. Do you know where we're going? And he kind of nodded no. We had no communication with DK. I didn't have a phone at that time to make a call to him. I had a cell phone, but I didn't have all the bells and whistles that I have with my iPhone now and international ability. And so we headed off, and we were all just a little bit nervous. We didn't know who this fellow was. Was he trustworthy? I do know that it was cold. We were heading towards the mountains in January. In North India, it gets very cold. The window on the passenger side didn't go all the way up, so I had this gap and cold air's coming in. The heat in the car didn't work, no surprise. And so we were all just a little discombobulated. And just as we're getting to the outskirts of this huge city of Delhi, he pulls over. And I thought, uh-oh, this isn't good. He gets out of the car, and I think, we're now really in trouble. I'm carrying a lot of money on me. But as he went, he found another young man who came. The second young man jumps in and says, take to Chandigarh. And I said, yes. Who are you? He said, brother. So the brother of the taxi driver, who was apparently tired, it's now after midnight. And so we get this new driver. He has no idea who DK is. We don't know what we're going to do, but we set out on this highway. And like I said, it was cold. Now, back in the back, they put some coats and things and blankets on, and I think they managed to fall asleep. There was no way I was going to sleep with this guy driving who I know nothing about, who speaks, just a very few words of English. At one point, he pulled over to get gas, popped open the trunk, and there was this welded in small black tank. And I didn't know what he was doing, but he went to the part of the fuel station where they have hydrogen. And so he put hydrogen in to this welded in tank. I didn't know how that was going to work. I had visions of somebody hitting us from behind and our car exploding. And I don't know if it's that kind of hydrogen. I'm not a scientist. I just know that that made the trip all that much more crazy and frightening. And so on we went. Finally, as we were just about to get into Chandigarh, we see DK and his SUV over on the side of the road. And I suppose this taxi driver assumed that. I was hoping it. I just wasn't sure. But praise God, we all got back together. He took us into the part of town where the church is at, where he preaches, where we were going to be holding a conference. And we were all able to get hotel rooms. And I think about 7 a.m., I got to sleep for about 3 hours. We knew we had to eat some. And at noon, this conference was beginning, and I was going to be the first speaker. And so I had to really get my wits about me. But I can't begin to tell you what a blessing Scott and I had over the next few days leading this conference. And they were allowing us to teach about the New Testament church through the book of Acts. They had given us a number of things they wanted us to cover, but especially the early church, how the church functioned, the doctrine of the apostolic New Testament church. And there were no holds barred. They just let us teach right from the Bible. And these fellows, about 70 of them, coming from many churches, actually from about 5 or 6 different states of India. People had bussed in, they had trained, come in trains. They were all sleeping in different parts of the church, which is on 3 levels. And I met some of the most beautiful people, preachers from many different denominations, from Baptist churches, Pentecostal churches, holiness churches, some non denominational churches, um, all friends of DK as he had networked. And they were just amazing. We ate with them, we ate the same food they ate, sat down, had discussions with many of them who had faced great persecution. But the wonderful thing was that when the week was over and they headed home, many of them had become dear friends. I still communicate on Facebook with some of them. And I got letters, and Scott got letters for some time later and emails from some of these folks who didn't necessarily change the name of their church or leave their denomination, but began to teach a New Testament pattern. And many of them started observing the Lord's Supper every week, started baptizing those who were believers for the remission of sins, and just understood church polity in a different fashion. And was so thankful for that. And of course, we learned from them and some of the great work that they were doing as well. Had an amazing fellowship. And I got to say something about DK. He is originally from Nagaland himself, and he's one of those who did accept the mission call. And so he went into a part of India where where there's about every world religion possible. Chandigarh has obviously many Hindus, also many Sikhs. The Sikh religion is big there because it's in Punjabi. Let me say that right, Punjabi. Um, the people there, or in Punjab is the state, they're Punjabi people. Let me get that right. Um, but they so there is Sikhism, there's Hinduism, there's Buddhism, obviously coming from the north. Um, I think certainly plenty of Muslims in that area. Uh, I may have made a mess of all of that, but the point is there's a lot of world religions there, and of course Hinduism being the biggest threat. Um, and DK in that church has 4 services on Sunday, um, a couple in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. And there are 4 different languages for these services. One is in Punjabi, one is in Hindu or Hindi, one is in Nepali, and one is in English. And Scott and I were able to preach at those churches, and obviously had a great time the Sunday before we left. And the beautiful thing was that on that final day, there were 18 who wanted to be baptized into Christ. And DK said, Dave, I really want you to do the baptizing. And I said, I don't think that's the best idea. Paul, when he went on mission trips, rarely did the baptizing. It should be you. This is your church. And he said, no, I've talked with the people, and they're very excited because, after all, you and Scott were ones to invest in me a few years ago and to teach me of the importance of baptism. And I would like you to do it. And so on this January Sunday morning, at a baptistry that's up on top of the 3rd level, so it's outside in very cold water. I was able to baptize these 18 people, and again, in the process, made some really fantastic friends. And so God showed up in a big way. God showed up in our flight and making our connection in Amsterdam. God showed up in Janet Hudson not going on the trip. God showed up in our crazy travels through the mountains. God showed up in helping us find a lost passport. God showed up in semi miraculously getting us to Chandigarh safely and to the right place, not having somebody knock us over the head and take our money. God showed up in all these friendships and this a wonderful time that I was able to spend with these preachers and good friends that we had met. In fact, the day after church, that following Monday, we weren't flying out until Tuesday evening. So that Monday, we were able to go and visit a couple of the preachers that didn't live too far away and able to just spend time eating in their homes and forming incredible friendships. And then, of course, we made our trip back to Delhi, caught our flight to Chicago, and then back to Indianapolis. You never take safety for granted. And so, to me, that was just a story that always stands out in my mind as a time when I was a bit afraid, and that's not usual for me. I'm normally pretty fearless, having grown up on the mission field, being somebody who loves adventure. Um, but even in Chandigarh, as we stayed at the hotel, especially Joe and myself, who got to be good friends. I hadn't really known him before either. He is a member at church where George Fall used to preach, and I know some of you know Brother George Fall well. And so Joe and I would venture out. I mean, we'd go out in the morning and find our breakfast somewhere before we would take auto rickshaws a couple of miles from where we were staying to the church. Um, and we would, even if we got in at night, we'd just go wandering the streets. And I love to do that, meeting people. And again, we talked with people who were Sikhs. There were a couple of times we were invited into homes. We're just walking right by, and they'd say, "Oh, come for tea at my house." Very friendly people, and so met many Sikhs. Obviously, met some Hindu people and had a chance to talk with them a little bit about their religion, sometimes through a translator. Didn't really have many encounters with Muslims or Buddhists on that particular trip, but I think was able to get a feel for that part of the world. And I always plan to go back. Like I said, DK has come and stayed at our home. I've always intended to go back. Then, when I became chairman of the mission in Zimbabwe and we began to connect with some of our other missionaries that we support and making trips, it just never happened. And then, unfortunately, my health um, kind of went south the last few years. And so, after having made, I think, 7 trips to India and 5 to Nagaland, I've not been back, and I miss my friends there. And I would ask that you pray for the Christians there, the Naga people. They're not only in the state of Nagaland, they're also in Assam and in Manipur and even a couple of other states. And that northeast part of India, again, is an island of hope in the midst of darkness, surrounded by all these nations that, for the most part, do not know the one true God and certainly don't know Jesus Christ. And it's our prayer that those people will continue, the Naga people, to be raised up in Christ and then to be willing to go into parts of India and China and Southeast Asia, taking the gospel and establishing churches as DK has done. Well, I hope this will suffice for what you wanted, and I'm willing to answer questions if you want some time on a Zoom call, certainly about the work in Zimbabwe that I love so much, about the work in India, though I know you've had Mike come, and I would love to talk about other places where we have works in the Philippines, in Italy, in Canada, in the Dominican Republic, and other places that we support. Um, Great work in Northeast Africa, reaching Muslims, even getting slowly into Sudan and Somalia from a base in Ethiopia. So, love to talk with you about that if you have any interest. Obviously, Rob Thompson now is the man at church who is over the Christian education, adult discipleship, but also over missions. And he has a missions background himself, is just a wonderful guy. And so, know that he is a resource as well. And I thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope I am making sense. That is not as easy as it used to be due to my disease, and more than that, the medicines that I'm on. But thank you, Kowalski family. Greetings to all of the kids, hugs to them, and I hope you all have a blessed time in your group.